Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
This is our Halloween edition.
Spooky, spooky.
It is very late at night again. We are just it's been a busy few weeks. So we're trying to fit everything in where we can. Here it is after 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So, I'm
It was
gonna
supposed
do
to
my
be like
best.
8:36 is when we got on, and then we talked for
hmm
like 30 minutes, and now here we are.
Yeah. I don't know how this
So
happened, but
it happens every time. We
it
act
does.
shocked every time. And we have also seen each other. We saw each other over the weekend, recorded the Patreon last night, and are now recording again and have texted most of the day.
Yes.
And a 2-minute video of me explaining something that happened in my day was also sent. Like, it's not like we have not talked.
And then we still just talked for an entire 30 minutes and then we start recording where we still keep talking nonsense. So, okay. So if you guys are
Yes.
here on Patreon, it is a video episode. So hello, we are waving. We are
Hi.
doing all the fun stuff. If you guys are new, we do these once a month on Patreon. So just a regular episode that you guys get in video version, unedited, because we're kind of lazy and kind of dumb, kind of combination of both. Don't really know how to edit or really care to take the time to do it. So you just get
And let's be honest, that many people don't watch it. So
exactly.
not going to put that much time into it when it's not really watched.
So yeah, so we do have some fun, spooky Halloween backgrounds that we're going to add on for you guys, and we have not seen each other's. So, Courtney, are you
ready?
ready?
Yes.
Are we gonna count down?
Oh,
Oh,
no.
okay. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yay.
I almost did that one.
Isn't it cute with
Almost.
a little
That one is really cute.
pumpkin and like
Yes.
the graves? There was a skull one I really wanted to do. But it was like in the middle, so I felt like you couldn't really see it.
I saw that one too. And there was another one I saw that I can't remember which one it was, but it like was your entire head that I'm like, okay, so you can't see anything because that's where your head
Yeah.
goes. So
Like I
it's a
wanted
little
my moon and my
confusing.
little pumpkin. My little pumpkin. Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry for those of you who are just listening and have no idea what we're talking about, but we are on Patreon if you want to come see this video and see how many times we mess up our words because it is late at night and
It'll probably be
it's a
quite a
struggle.
bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, and you can see what our backgrounds are.
Yes.
Plug, plug, plug.
Anyway, so we are going to just dive in because it is a long episode and it is late and my eyes are blurring already. And so we're just gonna jump into it. If you guys did not see the title, we are covering the Salem witch trials for today's Halloween themed episode. And our sources were the Unobscured Season 1 podcast by Aaron Mahnke, Smithsonian Magazine, Salem.org, historyofmassachusetts.org, and the SalemWitchMuseum.com.
Which also, everyone, please go listen to Unobscured Season 1.
Yes.
Because it is truly a work of art. And this is basically, he does like a 12-part, hour-long each episode deep dive on the Salem witch trials. And we are just doing like one episode, clearly. So, and he has like historians on there, and like he's like read basically every book there is and done all the research. Like very, very well done. This is just a little tiny version
the
of
Cliff
it.
Notes version of
yeah, the
that
TLDR of that
podcast. Yes. I feel like that just sums up our where we are in terms of like cultural references that I go for Cliff Notes and Courtney goes for TLDR.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Okay. So, jumping on in. In 1689, English rulers William and Mary started a war with France in the American colonies. So this would be known as King William's War to Colonists, and it destroyed regions of upstate New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. a lot of refugees fled into the county of Essex and specifically Salem Village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So Salem Village is now Danvers, Massachusetts, and colonial Salem town became what is now known as Salem. So a lot of these refugees put a hardship on Salem Village, and soon a lot of fighting would begin. So Salem Village pushed really hard to gain independence from Salem town and become their own entity. And one of the biggest supporters of this was the Putnam family. So their dynasty began in 1641 when old John Putnam arrived and bought over 800 acres of land. It was then divided between his three sons, Thomas, Nathaniel, and John Jr. So they weren't happy with a lot of what the town was doing, especially because the churches were a little bit more relaxed on their practices and just kind of more lenient on things. However, the Porter brothers, Joseph, Benjamin, and Isaiah, all had about 2,000 acres of land between them. So they were the most wealthy and influential of the families, especially farming families. And the Porters also had deep financial ties to Salem town, so an independent Salem Village wouldn't really help them financially. And breaking the towns up would break up their properties. So the Putnams are basically Salem Village, and then the Porters are Salem town. So kind of these two separate.
Those are kind of your alliances, which it definitely comes in later.
Yes. So they ended up building a meeting place that served as a community center and church. And eventually Salem Village became a recognized district within Salem town, and different ministers were brought in to try and unify Salem town and Salem Village. They had tried for 12 years to get the church up and running, but it just wasn't really working. So Reverend Samuel Parris came to Salem in 1689. So Samuel's father, Thomas, owned a sugar plantation in Barbados, and Samuel had left in 1670 to attend Harvard, and 3 years later, just shy of getting his degree, his father died, so he did return to Barbados to take over the plantation. Eventually it failed, and racial tensions just got really high on the island, and in 1680, he sold everything and went back to Boston. So he did arrive with one of the enslaved people, Tituba, and her husband. And he eventually heard that Salem Village was looking for a minister. So negotiations took almost a year, but Samuel became Salem Village's fourth minister. He became ordained by the community, and he was really strict, so this caused a lot of controversy there. A lot of people didn't like Reverend Parris because of his rigid ways and his greedy nature. So if people did not follow what he believed was the proper teaching, he would just refuse to baptize them, which was a really big deal back then. It's if you don't get baptized, you don't go to heaven. It's you need this person to allow this to happen for you.
And back then, religion was just such a big thing. Mm-hmm. And that's so talked about in the Unobscured podcast is we didn't really go into all the differences between the less strict and strict churches, but they just believed if you were not strict enough, you were the devil. And I mean, obviously we're gonna see this, but yeah, it was just, religion was such a big deal, even more than it is today. It's just kind of crazy how religious they were.
Yeah, definitely. So the Puritan villages believed that all this fighting was the work of the devil, of course. And people in this time, they're really religious. They're also super superstitious. Did not mean to use both of those words together. But they believed that the devil had a lot of power and meddled in their societies, and that the devil could give certain people known as witches the power to harm others in return for their loyalty. So there was a huge witchcraft craze that spread through Europe from the 1300s to the end of the 1600s, and tens of thousands of supposed witches were executed. So in January of 1692, Reverend Parris's daughter Elizabeth, who went by Betty, who was 9, and his niece Abigail Williams, who was 11, they started having these fits. So they would scream and throw things. They would utter these peculiar sounds and contort themselves in odd positions, just some weird things going on. So the local doctor blamed the supernatural because clearly he's had so much medical training, and that's obviously what it is.
Yeah.
So another girl, Ann Putnam, who was 11, also started experiencing these fits. On February 29th, under pressure from magistrates Jonathan Corwin and John Hawthorne, the three girls blamed their episodes on three women: Tituba, the enslaved woman who was living with the Paris family; Sarah Good, who was a homeless beggar; and Sarah Osborne, who was an elderly, impoverished woman. So this reminded Reverend Paris of a story that he had heard. So in 1688, 4 children from a Boston family, Goodwin, started having unusual symptoms. These fits, seizures, violent twisting, odd contortions. And at some point in their suffering, they said they were being attacked by their neighbor, an elderly Irish immigrant named Goody Glover. So Goody is not a first name. Like at this time, Goodman and Goody were like Mr. and Mrs. So just wanted to put that out there.
Which is so weird. I'm like, why? Where did that come from? I mean, I guess where did Mr. and Mrs. come from? But like Goody and Goodman. Like,
yeah. It's very interesting. So she was eventually found guilty of witchcraft and was hanged in Boston. And there were others as well that had spread around this time. And so like clearly this story and others like it are at the top of his mind when thinking about these fits and when Sarah Good came to his door one day. So Sarah Good knocked on the Paris's door, and she and her small daughter had come to beg for help. So she's really known to be like rude and unpleasant. She would come and beg, and when people turned her away, she would just like mutter under her breath and like say things about their property that could have sounded like a curse. You know, if you're someone who is superstitious or like, oh, what did you say? Like, are you cursing me? What is happening? So on the day she came to the Paris home, Samuel gave the little girl some food and then sent them on. So Sarah did her normal muttering as they left, but now Samuel's like paying more attention to what's happening.
Yeah, like she's probably just like, ugh, that greedy bastard. And he's
right.
like, oh, she's putting a curse on my whole family.
You heard that, right? Yeah. So Mary Sibley was watching the girls at one point and tried to make a cure for them. So, as you do, obviously, they took the girls' urine and mixed it with flour to make biscuits and baked them. And again, obviously, they fed the biscuits to the family dog. Because that makes perfect sense.
It makes no sense.
Yeah. So no one's not really sure the reasoning behind this, but both girls did experience an increase like in their symptoms after this like just like dramatic uptick in all these symptoms. And so both named Tituba as the attacker. So she denied it, but she did tell them like what had happened with the biscuits. Like she's like, you should know this is
like, it's not me, it's that woman feeding the urine biscuits to the dog.
Like I'm pretty sure a urine biscuit is a lot more witchy than some muttering, you know. Yeah. Like
poor Tituba didn't do anything except not be white. Like
right? Story of America. So another girl started coming forward describing being attacked as well. So Elizabeth Hubbard was walking home one night when she saw demonized wolves, and she said that she saw Sarah Osborne's spirit at the same time. Okay. So 2 constables went to arrest Tituba and Sarah Osborne, and they took note of details of like their houses when they arrested them. They said they were looking for anything related to witchcraft, but they didn't find anything. So they also brought in all 4 girls, Betty, Abigail, Annie, and Elizabeth, to get further detail. So they were also asked to bring in anyone who could be a witness. And this obviously drew this huge crowd to the meeting hall. And Sarah Good was questioned first in the meeting hall at this time. So we're going to give a little history on Sarah. So Sarah Good was an outsider, but she hadn't started life that way. Her father was a successful pub owner when she was born in 1653. So trouble began when she was 19 years old when he died, and he didn't leave any of his wealth to her. So she was just completely alone and like has nothing and no one. So she did have a first husband who was a farmer, but life was really hard for them. They took on a lot of debts. And when he died, she just had all this burden on herself. So her second husband, William Good, thought that he could help, but then they just got buried again by the weight of this debt. The couple did have a 5-year-old daughter named Dorothy and a 3-month-old infant. So Sarah and William unfortunately had to sell all of their land in order to support themselves, and by March of 1692, they were homeless. They would often sleep in neighbors' barns and beg for food. So in front of the magistrates, she said that she was not possessed with any spirit, and they asked her if she had made a contract with the devil. He then asked her why she was harming the 4 girls, and she said, "I do not hurt them." And then the girls soon started convulsing in pain and crying out. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Hawthorne, of course, used this as evidence of witchcraft. I mean, she said, I don't do anything. And then they started spazzing. And so now that is evidence of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah Good was now blaming Sarah Osborne instead of herself. So William spoke about Sarah on the stand to try and testify to her character. And William had a few weeks earlier said to someone in the town, Sarah is a witch or very close to becoming one. So now he's trying to like back out of this comment. And he's like, I was just lashing out after a fight. He said that she was an enemy of all good. So
talk about when you shit talk your wife backfiring on you.
yeah, maybe you should have kept that one to yourself. But, you know, I don't know. I also think about all the times I told Courtney I'm going to kill my husband. And if my husband died, you know, that would not look great for me.
That's what I think all the time too. Like I try not to say like I'm gonna kill someone because what happens if then like they get killed and it's like, well, you sent a text message. You called her a witch.
Yeah. How dare you? So after all of this, Sarah Good's hearing is now over. So now Sarah Osborne was brought in. So Sarah Osborne had no idea like what had happened during Sarah Good's questioning. She had actually been stuck in bed for about a year from an unknown illness. She couldn't do a lot of things, including attending church. And the community had noticed that like she wasn't there. She wasn't doing the things that she was supposed to do. And after marrying into a distant branch of the Putnam family and raising 2 sons, her husband died and put his land in the hands of John and Thomas Putnam. So they weren't exactly like sharing with Sarah. And also shortly after his death, she was in a relationship with a young indentured servant named Alexander Osborne. So this is like this huge scandal. They accused them of killing her husband and like they mocked their age difference. The community just gossiped a lot about them. So all 4 girls then began to like shriek and convulse at the sight of Sarah Osborne. So they believed that they were at this time watching a witch torture her victims. So like clearly she is doing this to them. There's no other explanation for their behavior. So they asked her some of the same questions that they asked Sarah Good. And the magistrates also asked how often she saw Sarah Good. And she's like, I haven't seen her in the last 2 years. She said,
I've been in bed for a year. I'm not seeing anybody.
I'm not doing anything with anyone. You guys have all noticed that.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm more likely to be bewitched than be one myself. So Hawthorne questioned it, and Sarah Osborne explained that she had a dream where someone broke into her home and hurt her, and she then stopped going to church soon after this dream. So they believed that this dream pointed to her becoming in a contract with the devil. Again, so much logical thinking here, you know?
So much logic, so much
Clearly.
So now the third woman accused, Tituba, was clearly more than an outsider in Salem Village. So in most surviving documents, she was called like an Indian, which in the 1690s usually referred to anyone from the Native American tribes in the area. However, she was not from North America. So she had been kidnapped from her home and taken far away. So she began her life in slavery in Barbados, and Barbados actually placed a really high value on enslaved people from South America, especially the area that's now known as like Venezuela. So they believe it's probably likely she was kidnapped from there at the age of 10 and taken straight to Barbados to serve there. So it's not like 100% certain, but from like all the clues historians can gather, like they think that's likely like where she came from. So Samuel had brought her and her husband John to Boston when he had sold everything, like as we mentioned before. But it's very important to remember she's not white. And as we see even today, people are treated differently based on the color of their skin. And in a world where they're calling people witches, it's really not much better.
Like, obviously, this was still happening then as well.
Yeah. So Tituba did say, the devil came to me and bid me serve him. And she said she had seen 4 women torture the girls, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and she couldn't remember the names of the others. And she also would like reference like the tall man. So according to her, there are like 5 others beside her, like 4 women and 1 man. And Tituba did apologize for hurting the girls and said she was only doing what she was told to do. She couldn't name the man, but said he would sometimes appear as a hog and a big black dog that would talk to her. She also mentioned like yellow birds and red cats. Enough is not really known about Tituba to understand like why she said these things. Like most people believe she was probably fed lines to say in this time.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's like a big like cultural difference as well, like what these like Puritan white Christians believe versus, maybe her understanding of what the devil would be or anything like that.
I was also
Um,
wondering too, because I'm assuming that English is not her first language, and like what kinds of things are lost in translation here too. You know what I mean?
mhm, yeah. And she also did mention a wolf that was sent to hurt Elizabeth Hubbard. So Tituba also describes Sarah Osborne turning into a creature to hurt the girls. So she told like a lot of tales. And again, we don't really know why she was saying these things, but of course the girls start acting out again. And Tituba was like, yeah, I can see Sarah Good hurting them. And then the girls stopped their fits. So it was like it was like a play almost. It was a big commotion. Like
Yeah.
it was a circus. Like, so the three women were taken to jail to be held while awaiting like an official trial. So this was just kind of like a conversational, like a questioning in front of the whole town, basically.
Yeah.
So as the crowd leaves, they now believe there's 5 witches in their community with only 3 behind bars. So once home, Elizabeth started to have another attack, and she said someone imaginary was poking and hurting her. She said Sarah Good was there, but was invisible. And when they went to check on Sarah Good in her cell, she was actually gone, like she'd escaped. And when they found her the next morning, there was like blood on her arm. And so, like, they think like maybe she was there, like hurting her. And the magistrates questioned Tituba further in her cell. And she said the tall man had brought her a book to sign. And when they asked, like, how many names are in this book, she said 9. So Hawthorne and Corwin are now like, wow, we got 9 witches in town now. Like, we got a lot of witches in here. And Tituba said they only made marks, like they didn't write their name, they just like made a symbol or something. So she was like, I don't know who they are. So again, many today believe like Tituba was not being truthful, and a lot of her confessions were just coerced. I mean, we still see this today with
Mm-hmm.
someone who, again, English isn't your first language or have a lower IQ or your rank in society at this moment and you're going to do
Yeah.
anything that's going to help you. um,
Yeah.
she was likely very scared and just trying to help her situation any way she could and just telling like the magistrates like what they wanted to hear. And if they hadn't tried to push her and get her to say these things, like maybe this whole situation probably would have stopped before it is what is today. But like these magistrates, they just kind of found what they viewed as the weakest link and were like, we're going to make her say whatever we want her to
Mm-hmm.
say.
They're like, someone in this town is going to be accused of being a witch. So do you want it to be you or do you want it to be someone else? Like, let us know
Yeah.
your pick. Like, we're gonna kill someone either
Yeah.
way.
So Betty had another attack, and Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba were sent to a Boston jail to await trial. And then on March 3rd, Annie Putnam said she was being tortured again. And she said this time the attackers were new to her. One was a woman she couldn't see clearly, but the other was clear. And she did claim it was Dorothy Good, which was Sarah Good's 5-year-old daughter. Again, like she's 5. And she said Dorothy was holding the devil's book out to her and demanding her to sign it. And unfortunately, people believed her. So they're like, wow, the 5-year-old's a witch too.
Yep. You know, those 5 year
Um,
olds always making deals with the devil, you know?
yeah,
I don't know. My 1 year old would not surprise me. I mean,
she, she sold her soul to the devil. Um, and so eventually she was able to put a name to the other woman, Elizabeth Proctor. So Elizabeth Proctor was the 41-year-old mother of 5 children, and she was pregnant with her 6th. So her and her husband, John Proctor, owned a tavern north of the village, and they were a part of the wealthy Proctor family, members of the church, and owners of a lot of land. And Elizabeth and John are like very well respected in the community. Like this was a big shock to people because it's like, wait a minute, like no, it can't be her. like, um, However, her grandmother, Goody Burke, had been accused of witchcraft 3 decades earlier. So kind of like they have like a
you're
history
like,
of
oh, yeah, makes
oh
sense. Also, Goody Bird. I just love it.
yeah. I know. The whole Goody Goodman thing is just like not helpful with some of these last names. I was also thinking like Sarah Good, so it's like Goody Good over here. Like um So John was 20 years older than her and had inherited his wealth from his parents. And Elizabeth was pretty smart and frugal, so they worked really well together. And they were a bit more progressive than their neighbors. And they were known to let local Native Americans drink in their tavern, which was a very big deal to the white people in the 1690s. People were so mad they even took John and Elizabeth to court over it. So the angry man, Giles Corey, did have a reputation for being quite a hothead. We'll get into him more later. And he did set someone's house on fire, and he had a teenage servant like beat very close to death, and the boy did die a few days later. So like he had to like pay a fine for that, but like wasn't formally charged because they were
Hmm.
like he beat him so badly it like led to his death, but there was like a delay, like it was a big loophole kind of thing. But like basically everyone was
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, he murdered that guy. Like,
Oh, he didn't die the day of, so therefore it wasn't
yeah,
me. It must have been something else that happened from these
yeah.
injuries. Yeah.
So John Proctor did win the case, and they continued serving Native Americans in their taverns. They did have a servant whose family had like all died of tuberculosis, Mary Warren, and Elizabeth wasn't very nice to her. So when she heard the rumors from Annie, she kind of saw an opportunity. So on March 12th, she felt an attack, and basically John was like, "Quit it, stop." And she did until he left for town a few days later. And then she said she had another vision, an attack, but this time it was Martha Corey, who's Giles Corey's wife, which is another new name to all these accusations. And a lot of people in the community did not like the Coreys. Like I said, I mean, hothead over here. Um, but they were surprised because Martha was kind of a high ranking member of the church. So now this starts opening the door to more accusations of church members. And the next was Rebecca Nurse. So Rebecca was 71 years old. She was sickly and she was nearly deaf. She had a very large family of grown children and grandchildren. And her husband, Francis Nurse, was still alive and she had like a huge support network, you know? So she's like, I've lived my life. Now I got all my children and my grandchildren, and we're just, we're just vibing. We're 70. We're just chilling from here on out, you know?
Just nothing else going on, just relax. Everything's good.
I've done all I've had to do my whole life, and I'm gonna chill. She was a member of the Salem Town Church and respected in the community. So she had adopted a Quaker orphan, and a lot of people threw a fit about this because it was a Quaker and not a Puritan,
Hmm.
basically.
Yeah.
Even though it was an orphan. How dare you? Um, so during this time, a new accuser starts to come forward. So before it was mostly all young women ranging from like 9 to 16, but in the middle of this new wave, Ann Putnam Sr., Annie's mom, began to like report her own torment at the hands of these witches. So Anne was a 30-year-old mother and she was pregnant again, and she was also well respected. And now she's like, I'm being attacked by witches. So like everyone's just being attacked by witches.
Crazy how that happens.
Right. So during a sermon, all the girls started having fits again, and Martha Corey was arrested the next day because they were like, it's her, I guess. So the magistrates questioned her about the Devil's Book, and Martha is just like, what book? Like, I've never seen such a book. And she was defending herself, but the judges viewed it as being like too confident and forward. They're like, she is too confident in herself. Like, what? You're stepping out of line.
You know what they say
Um,
about, women who try to do or say anything. You just need to back up. You're
you need to
aggressive. You're a
back
bitch.
up.
You just need to get out of
We're
here.
we're accusing you of witchcraft that's punishable by death, and you're defending yourself. Back up.
I don't think so. You just take your death calmly like everyone else would.
Yeah. So Rebecca Nurse received a lot of the same treatment. She maintained her innocence, but during the questioning, Ann Putnam started accusing her of doing the devil's work. So there was another girl arrested, Abigail Hobbs, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm a witch and I'm proud of it." And in front of the magistrate, she spoke first saying like, "I've seen sights and I've been wicked and I hope God can help me be better." Kind of taking a different approach. I mean, maybe she's seeing like all these people are defending themselves and it's not working, so I'm going to be like, "Yeah, I'm a witch."
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
like it. Makes sense. Good
yeah, you know,
strategy.
go for it. So now Annie Putnam is starting to have a vision of Joe. I almost said Joe Burrow.
He's just doing the most back then too.
I
Just
know. So Annie Putnam is now having a vision of George Burroughs hurting her. So George Burroughs was an ex-minister who had previously left the Salem community on bad terms. And now the girls are also saying Abigail's Hobbs' parents are attacking them too. So we're having more people accused, men accused now. Like, it's just everybody.
This hysteria is just growing here.
Yeah. So within 10 days of Abigail Hobbs' investigation, 15 more names were on the list of the accused. Some were connected to old suspects, while some were kind of surprising to hear. So Giles Corey and Mary Warren were taken from their homes, examined, and jailed. Rebecca Nurse's younger sisters, Mary Easty and Sarah Cloyce, were also arrested. Nathaniel Putnam had his enslaved servant Mary arrested. And Bridget Bishop was also arrested again. So she had previously in the past been accused and acquitted of witchcraft. So Bridget Bishop was married, and some neighbors considered her like confrontational, but really she just stood up for herself, basically. And
Again,
now
these women over here just, running their mouths
crazy.
and trying to defend themselves. And I mean, obviously just a witch and obviously just too much.
And so the arrests are also starting to spread to other places in Essex County. And there were arrests like all around Salem, but we're just kind of focusing on Salem itself because, again, we would be here until 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
But so we're kind of trying to focus just on Salem. But William and Deliverance Hobbs, who were Abigail's parents, were also arrested at this time. So George Burroughs was also brought in for questioning, but he was in Maine and they didn't want him to run. So they had a group of men like secretly go up and capture him and bring him back for questioning. Because they're like, if we say like there's like a warrant out for his arrest, he's going to run. So we have to do this like in secret. And of course, the girls who were afflicted acted out when George came into the meeting room. So they accused him of killing his previous wives, and George tried to defend himself, but of course, no one's really buying it. Basically, the community was like, he's guilty before like they even got him back to Salem for questioning. And on the day after George's arrest, the crisis did claim its first life. So Sarah Osborne was already sick when she was arrested and put in the jail cell. And these jails were not designed to hold people for a long time. Like these were supposed to be like quick turnaround. Like people describe them as hell, unsuitable to live in long term. Like back in those days, most of the time you were arrested and tried like the next day. There was no like long term thing. And since Sarah Osborne was so sick, she did die in her jail cell in Boston, and she'd been held there for 9 weeks in horrible conditions with no trial. So John Willard had married into the Wilkins family, and one of his relatives had been charged with witchcraft a few years back. And John was also known to beat his wife with a stick. He had also used this discipline method with Putnam children, like when he babysat them. And he was the deputy constable to Salem Village. So he was like kind of help like hauling the accused to the different jails, helping arrest people. However, eventually like hauling all these people to jail kind of started to get to him. And he was like, I think maybe what we're doing is like wrong. Like, I don't really think this is right. And he also kind of felt like the accusations the girls were making were lies. Like he was like, I feel like this isn't true.
Like
I feel like
something
this
doesn't add up here.
Yeah. So he tried to like talk to them, like to the girls and be like, you need to stop lying. And of course, it backfired. And the next day, Annie Putnam is now saying she was attacked by John's spirits. And around this time, they had noticed he'd stopped serving warrants on those accused of witchcraft. So now all the like many girls in town are saying they're attacked by his spirit. With the accusation spreading, John Willard did flee Salem. He's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta leave because I'm next. And a boy like did die. Not really with like any like relation actually to John Willard. But they believed he'd been like bewitched to death by John Willard. So they're like, he just died of who knows what back in the 1690s. And they were like, it was John Willard bewitching him. So he was finally caught, however, and arrested. So, William Phipps was able to become governor in Massachusetts with help from his friend Increase Mather, and he decided to create a special court that was under English law. So, on May 27th, he ordered the establishment of a special court of oyer, which means to hear, and terminer, which is to determine, for Suffolk, Essex, and Middlesex counties. So, it's kind of like the same legal system that worked in Old England, like kind of like what it is today, too. Like you have a grand jury that listens to the cases, an attorney general for Massachusetts that like presents the case. You have like jurors who decide on the case. And in these days, it usually took 2 to 3 days, but basically, like everyone was found guilty with these courts. It's like you're basically always found guilty.
Yeah, like if you make it to that point, you might as well just say goodbye.
Yeah.
So after the court was announced, more and more accusations are just like quickly coming in. They even had trouble keeping up with the warrants because there were just so many. But this, of course, did not stop them from arresting as many and as fast as they could. So the special court had 9 judges who, shocker, were all white, powerful, rich men. Did not see that coming.
Crazy.
So the first case brought before the special court was Bridget Bishop. So they thought that this would be like their most likely to get a conviction. So like, we'll go ahead and try her first. So Bridget had married a man named Samuel in England, and they quickly had a child. Unfortunately, the newborn did die soon after birth, and then Samuel died not long after, but Bridget was pregnant with their second child at that time. So she decided to head to America, probably for a fresh start. And again, unfortunately, her second child then died as well. So she's just now completely alone. So 2 years later, she married again to Thomas Oliver, and Thomas had lost a spouse as well. However, Thomas was abusive towards Bridget, and a neighbor said that she frequently saw Bridget with a bloody face and bruises. Bridget was seen publicly as like stubborn and too outspoken, again, like we've mentioned with a lot of these women, and she had called her husband an old devil. And of course, now Bridget is being accused of being a witch for all of this. So long before the girls made their accusations, rumors of Bridget were being passed around town of people seeing her before their children like died, or she was like hurting them, like they're connecting her to, these children's death for no reason. So she was being charged with witchcraft, but she never had to go to trial. So then Thomas died in 1679, and Bridget was now responsible for his debts. So she spent most of the next year in court with people demanding, like trying to get their money back. So in 1685, she met Edward Bishop, and they got married and started a tavern. So she was later arrested for theft and spent 3 months in jail, and she had to pay a fine, and it just really tarnished her reputation. And this was like the final straw for the community. So they're like, with this reputation, like she is a great person for us to go first with these trials. And of course, she's like, I don't even know what a witch is. I don't know what you're talking about.
What's a witch? I don't know.
No idea. But she had lied some in her questioning, so they believed that she was lying about other things as well, but she did maintain her innocence throughout her trial. So it took the jury 6 days to issue their verdict, and they did find her guilty and sentenced her to death. So on June 10th, Bridget became the first person hanged on what was later called Gallows Hill. So we don't know where she was buried. That information hasn't made it into the last 400 years. So
yeah, they said most people were buried like near where they were executed, but like, and some families might have come and got like their loved ones' bodies, but it's just like no one really knows.
Yeah. So on June 16th, Roger Toothaker died in jail waiting for his trial. Roger was Martha Carrier's brother-in-law and worked as a folk healer. So people started to have doubts around this time because they're like, it's one thing to throw around these accusations, but now 3 people have died because of these accusations, like either from being found guilty or dying in jail, awaiting your trial for these accusations. So one of the 9 judges in the court of oyer and terminer had actually resigned from his post because of this. So Rebecca Nurse's family had previously had some drama with the Putnams. They did have some land issues where the Town family had bought some land near them, and now Rebecca and her sisters, who, if we remember, are all in jail at this time on witchcraft charges, and the accusations had come from the Putnam household. So we're starting to see some connections here.
Yeah.
So they really didn't like Rebecca because she was married into a Salem town family, aligning herself with the Porters. So Rebecca was a Salem town church member, not the stricter Salem village church. And they also didn't like Rebecca due to her taking in the orphan Quaker child, because remember, that's just blasphemy.
How dare you take in an orphan child?
I know, such a horrible person. So her trial was up next after Bridget. So many came forward and testified against her, but her family brought many character witnesses to testify for her and to raise doubts against the girls' accusations. Her daughter Sarah even testified that she saw one of the girls take a needle and prick herself and then accused Rebecca of hurting her. Again, shocker.
Yeah.
So at first, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. Then the girls started going into fits, and then the jurors asked why an accused witch had testified that Rebecca was also a witch, and Rebecca said she's one of us. So when asked to elaborate further, she didn't say anything, but she was almost deaf, so she probably just couldn't hear exactly what was being asked or what was happening. So then they found her guilty. And many think now that when she said one of us, she just meant like a fellow prisoner and not a fellow witch. So others were brought to trial on June 28th, including Sarah Good. So Sarah's daughter, Dorothy, was still in jail as well. And remember, she is only 5. So
yeah.
Her trial was the opposite of Rebecca's. No one came to help testify for her, and Tituba actually came to testify against her about the story she had told, and she was found guilty. So Susanna Martin was like Sarah Good. She was a widow who was all alone. And Elizabeth Howe and Sarah Wilds were also seen at trial this day, and they were in connection to Rebecca. So Elizabeth Howe was Rebecca's sister-in-law. So Sarah Wilds was close with the Nurse family, and both of them were declared guilty as well. So now we have 5 convicted witches this day alone. And also just another little random fact here. If anyone has ever listened to the Strange and Unusual podcast, Elizabeth Howe is one of her ancestors. It's actually her 18th great-grandmother.
Which I thought was like pretty crazy. Like,
that
isn't
is
that like
insane.
to be like, that was my 18th great-grandmother who was found guilty of being a witch.
Was one of the witches, yeah. Also, I thought about trying to tell a joke and say great-grandmother 18 times, but I was like, that's too much effort. I'm not gonna. Or great. Okay, so
great,
I can't even get through the rest of the script, much less trying to improv there. So on July 19th, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Wilds were hung to death. People did start to confess to being a witch, but now it seems like they're just doing it to save their lives because they're like, okay, like they're denying it and they're being hung. So maybe I can try to confess and we'll see what would happen. And they would usually only name other people who had already died or had already been accused. And everyone's just trying to save themselves at this point.
Yeah.
So from August 2nd through the 5th, the third round of trials started up. So Martha Carrier, who is known as the Queen of Hell, went to trial, as well as John and Elizabeth Proctor. So John and Elizabeth Proctor were well-respected members of the community, and George Jacobs and John Willard also went to trial. So remember, we talked about John Willard earlier. His trial was over in a few hours. George Jacobs was an illiterate farmer with a wild sense of humor, and some of the original afflicted girls came forward to say that George's spirits attacked them. They even said that they could see it during the trial, and George Burroughs' trial was also to begin during this round. So George Burroughs was a minister, but he did get the nickname of the King of Hell, and he was also accused of being the leader of the witches. His trial began on August 5th, and a lot of people testified against him, and witnesses talked about how he had tormented them. And some of the afflicted also fell into trances and fits during his trial. Again, just complete circus, like Courtney said earlier. So George Burroughs, Martha Carrier, George Jacobs, John Proctor, Elizabeth Proctor, and John Willard were all found guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death by hanging. So Elizabeth Proctor was pregnant, and in those days you could, quote, plead your belly. So basically, she would not be hung until after she gave birth. So the rest of the group were executed on August 19th. George Burroughs declared his innocence and then recited the Lord's Prayer. So it was understood at this time that a witch could not recite the Lord's Prayer. So the crowd is obviously like starting to feel some doubt at this point, but at this point, there's no turning back. Like, this is what we're doing. We're going with it.
Yeah, because they're like, a witch could never say the Lord's Prayer, and then here he is, like,
Yeah.
and like apparently, like they were saying in the Unobscure podcast, like they would line them up and just walk and push them off like one by one.
Oh,
And I'm just like, oh my gosh, could you imagine how horrible that would be? To just be like,
awful.
well, they're coming for me next.
Just
Like, I'm
standing
just
there and
gonna stand
waiting.
here.
And
Ugh. Ugh, so horrible.
yeah.
And people just watching it. Ugh.
Yeah. So the fourth session of trials were now coming up. So Samuel Wardwell was part of this trials this round as well, and he had a reputation for fortune telling and divination, which many viewed as skills of a witch. So Samuel was really proud of these skills, and he had at one point said that he had been baptized by the devil in a local river. So people are not looking fondly upon him. Again, a lot of Samuels in the story as well. Samuels and Sarahs. I mean, they're just
Johns
and Johns
Georges
and Marys.
There's like Marys. There's like all the same names. Like
yes,
wrote to Abigail's.
yeah,
and like so many.
yeah. So Alice Parker was the wife of John Parker. And Alice was prone to seizures and like just kind of made people uncomfortable. She had a bit of a temper. Mary Warren was a neighbor, and years before, she had caused a scene at the Warren home, and Alice had asked Mary's father to help her with land keeping, and he agreed, but never showed up. So Alice went to their house and yelled at him, and then soon after, most of Mary's family got sick, and many of them died. So obviously,
she
like
was
you
the
do,
one who the family took in because her whole family died of tuberculosis. So she was like, it wasn't tuberculosis, it was a witch.
Yep. Yep, so Mary accused Alice of ruining her entire family, and Alice Parker was found guilty of witchcraft. So Mary Easty also went to trial. So if you remember in these many, many Marys, she was Rebecca Nurse's sister. So Mary had worked hard to defend her sister, and the court believed that a witch would defend another witch, obviously. So Mary was married to Isaac Easty and had 12 children. She was younger than Rebecca. She was in her 50s, and 8 men testified that they had witnessed Mary hurting someone. So like Rebecca, she brought a petition and a list of people who would vouch for her character. However, Mary was also found guilty. I know you guys are so surprised.
Yeah, right.
So Mary Bradbury was brought to Salem from a northern city. She also had prior accusations of witchcraft, and many of the afflicted girls said that she had attacked them that year, and she was found guilty. So after Mary Bradbury and Mary Easty's convictions, Samuel Wardwell, Anne Foster, and her daughter Mary Lacey from a neighboring city were also found guilty. And Abigail Hobbs, who had previously claimed to be a witch, was found guilty, and her testimony helped find other people guilty as well. On September 22nd, Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Samuel Wardwell, and Pudiator, Wilma Redd, and Margaret Scott were executed by hanging. Unfortunately, we don't know much about Anne Pudiator, Wilma Redd, and Margaret Scott. Mary Bradbury was not in the list of people executed that day because she had actually escaped. And she wasn't the only one who had escaped. It did happen a lot at the Boston jail. And a lot of people, a lot of historians think that the jailers probably took bribes. So it wasn't uncommon for some of them to be able to escape. So Giles Corey, we've talked about a little bit already. He was an 81-year-old farmer with a bad reputation, just really rough-spoken, like kind of vile, got into a lot of fights with his neighbors. He would steal things that he thought he deserved. He didn't really have any friends in the community. He was kind of a hard man to like. And when his wife Martha was arrested, they knew that he'd follow soon. So he maintained his innocence and said like how ridiculous the accusations were. And Giles was ready to fight back, especially after Martha was executed. So Giles refused to speak during his trial and answer like how he wanted to be tried. So with this, they're like not really sure what to do, but English law did allow them to use strong and cruel punishment. And so on September 19th, he was led to an open pasture. He was placed on the ground face up with boards placed onto his body to make a platform. And then one by one, they placed heavy stones on the board. So this is clearly just torture. Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine? So Giles refused to speak until eventually, with hundreds of pounds of stone on him, he said, "More weight." And this was the first and last execution by pressing in the Massachusetts colony.
Which, even though they say like Giles Corey was just kind of a menace and he was clearly like a racist, I'm just like, you go, you
Right?
make them like, you don't give them the satisfaction of a
Yeah.
trial. And like when they're like, oh, he's finally about to speak, you just go, more weight. Like,
Keep doing it. Yep.
that's a pretty badass move right there.
He'd practiced for that for a lot of years, apparently.
Yeah. So 5 days later, Cotton Mather wrote many papers believing that spectral evidence should be used to indict but not convict. So spectral evidence is how everyone's like, I'm having a dream, I'm having a vision, like these kind of more supernatural kind of things, not like actually seeing someone hurt you, being like, I see them in my dream, I see them in a vision, kind of like that. So the men in charge voted, and by a very narrow amount, they did vote to allow spectral evidence. Governor Phipps was trying to not act too fast, and he tried to stay out of it as long as he could because his wife had also been accused. So, stepping in now, they're like, it's going to look like you're only doing it for personal gain and you're supporting a witch. So, he's kind of trying to like agree with not allowing it, but he can't act too fast or it looks bad. So Governor Phipps dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer, and he declared like no more arrests, but a week after, a few more people were arrested. So they're just still doing it. And a lot of families who had more wealth could now likely like buy their way out of jail, but many just were not that lucky. And in December 1692, they were still waiting for like this new court system to begin. And so Anne Foster actually passed away in jail on December 9th. And on December 10th, someone finally paid 5-year-old Dorothy Goods bail, and she had spent 10 months in chains. And like, obviously, this affected her for the rest of her life when you're 5 years old and like people are dying around you and you're in horrible conditions.
And accused of being a witch, as you see all of these people in your community accused of being witches just being killed off, and
like
you are
your mom,
5. Yeah.
Like your mom was hanged, like just horrible. So new trials would start in January through the Massachusetts Superior Court. So on January 4th, 1693, the Superior Court heard its first case. So it was kind of similar to the court of Oyer and Terminer, where, evidence presented to the jury, they decide. However, in this new court, spectral evidence was no longer considered evidence. So you could not allow a lot of what was in the previous trials, like in this new court. So many of the defendants were actually now being acquitted and dismissed. Like logic is finally coming into Salem. Finally, we're getting a little bit of logic in here.
Here we go.
So by January 14th, over 50 cases of witchcraft have been heard. 30 of them have been thrown out with the label of ignoramus. One of those who was thrown out was Sarah Cloyce, who was the sister of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Easty. And 21 cases actually went to trial, but only 3 were found guilty. So this is a very big difference from the court of Oyer and Terminer, where every single person was found guilty.
Yeah.
Now, Elizabeth Proctor did soon give birth to her baby, so the safety net of her pregnancy was now gone. And she did likely give birth to her son alone in the jail. She did name him John, just like his father. So on February 1st, they went to execute the last 8 accused of witchcraft. However, they received a message from Governor Phipps that they all got a reprieve and they were to be set free. This reprieve didn't really like close the door on the trials, though. Like trials were still going on, but like no one else was going to be like executed after being accused or found guilty of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to wrap up like all these remaining open cases. Lydia Dustin was one who had been hounded for years by the accusations of witchcraft. All the evidence against her was spectral, and that was no longer permissible. So the jury did acquit her, but she like had to pay her jail fee to go home. So she returned to the jail. So even when you were found dismissed, you weren't just like let loose. Like you had to pay like your jail fee. So if your family was poor or you had no money because half your family was just hung because they were found guilty of being a witch, you just had to sit there. And that's what happened. She had to wait for her family to gather the funds to release her. And while she was there, she did become sick. And even after going home, she could not fight it. And she died on March 10th, 1963. And she is the official final victim of the Salem witch trials as far as like deaths go. So on May 10th, the court met to hear the rest of the cases. All were either found thrown out or found not guilty. Tituba was one of the people whose case was dismissed. However, no one would pay Tituba's bail. She was in jail for about a year before anyone paid her bail. And basically, because she was an enslaved person, she did just kind of become like, quote, property of the state and was sold. But there's really no transaction, like record of the transaction, like who
Ugh,
bought her, anything like that. Yeah. A human being sold. Like,
so horrific.
yeah. Years later, Tituba was interviewed and she did say Samuel Parris had beaten a confession out of her. Unfortunately, we don't really know what happened to Tituba after she was released from jail and the rest of her life. And in 1703, the convictions of Abigail Faulkner, Sarah Wardwell, and Elizabeth Proctor were reversed. Now, in August of 1706, little Annie Putnam, who is one of the chief instigators of this whole spectral evidence, is asking to become a member of the church. So she formulated an apology and confessed that she now believed all the people who were found guilty were innocent. And she stood in front of the congregation and apologized and said she was led astray and misguided. One historian on the podcast was like, she's acting like she was possessed by the devil, which she's accusing everyone else of. like,
Right? Like
um,
what?
and the congregation accepted her and she became a full member of the church. So these four girls, or multiple girls, but mostly those four, just kind of got to continue living their life like nothing happened. So many in Salem wanted the government to revoke the charges of those who'd been executed and like also wanted financial compensation. So a lot of the victims' families were left in destruction. Like if you lost your wife, if you lost your husband, like that's a big deal. I mean, and in 1710, Massachusetts legislature set up a committee to investigate what else they may be able to do. And when they came to Salem, they actually received 45 petitions for restitution. So they did reverse the property seizures of 12 executed witches, as well as Giles Corey and 7 others who've been convicted and not killed. 7 convictions at this time stayed in place. Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Alice Parker, and Putiator, Wilma Red, Margaret Scott, and Elizabeth Johnson. So their convictions were not reversed until 2001, 300 years later.
Like, wow. Wow. Because like this whole
300
time
years
they're still
later.
acting like, well, there are still some people who deserve to be killed for being witches, but not
Yeah.
all of them. We'll reverse some of them, but like y'all over here, this girl, like you guys were legit witches doing this. What?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are we still thinking at this point? Like we've reached past the point where we're not accusing everyone of being a witch, but we're like, okay, but this group still was for 300
Yeah.
years. Wow.
It's absolutely insane. And overall, though, after the Salem trials, there is a deafening silence. So many records were purged, court documents were purged. They tried to cover this up as quickly as possible. So not only are like these personal records missing, almost all of the documents from the court of Oyer and Terminer are gone. They have every single one from the Superior Court, it's kept. Historians do still occasionally find some from the court in Oyer and Terminer, but it's not frequent. Most of it was destroyed, covered up. Like they weren't trying to right wrongs, they were just trying to cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
So Phipps eventually did pardon all the people who were in prison on witchcraft charges by May 1693. But at this point, I mean, it's a little too late. 19 people have been hanged on Gallows Hill. 71-year-old man has been pressed to death with heavy stones. People are dying in jail. Nearly 200 overall have been accused of practicing the quote devil's magic. 200 people in this not that big town. So, following the trials and execution, many involved, like Judge Samuel Sewell, publicly confessed error and guilt. And on January 14th, 1697, the General Court ordered a day of fasting and soul searching for the tragedy in Salem. They ordered a
Yep,
lot of
that's gonna
these
fix
during the
it.
whole
That's gonna
thing.
fix it for
During like the
sure.
whole trials and everything, there was so many days of fasting. It's like, no wonder y'all are all grumpy because you're hungry. No wonder so many
Exactly.
people are getting accused.
Like, no shit, y'all are thinking everyone's a witch. Like, you're just hangry over here. Like,
Yeah. In 1702, the courts declared like all the rituals unlawful. In 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of those accused and granted £600 restitution to their heirs. However, it was not until 1957, 250 years later, that the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the events of 1692. So, many scientists do try to explain like what occurred in Salem in 1692. Like what in the hell happened here? So, one of like the more like concrete theories published in 1976 by psychologist Linda Caparol in Science, the magazine, blamed the abnormal habits of the accused on the fungus ergot, which can be found in rye, wheat, and other like cereal grasses. So, toxicologists say that eating ergot and contaminated foods can lead to like muscle spasms, vomiting, delusions, hallucinations. Also, the fungus thrives in warm and damp climates, not too unlike the swampy meadows in Salem Village, where rye was the staple grain during spring and summer months. However, most historians disagree. They say ergot poisoning is like more likely in people with a vitamin A deficiency, but a great source of vitamin A is fish. And Salem is a port community, so they're not low on fish. And all of like the afflicted were from like wealthy families. So it's like it's not likely that Annie Putnam was not having who was having a bad diet. Like it doesn't
mm-hmm.
really add up.
Yeah.
Some believe it could be encephalitis, which is like an inflammation of the brain. Another possible explanation is that sometimes it can be seen in children that they start to have seizures and fits in extremely religious households, which a lot of the girls were in. But none of these theories really just like hit the nail perfectly on the head. And a lot of people, like a lot of historians are like, it is fear and politics. Like these families were fighting in the community and they were like, look at all of like the mass hysteria we see in other parts of history, the Holocaust, the Red Scare, anything like that. Like it's mass hysteria where like people just lose all logic.
Like, all comes down to just hating people who are different from you and like,
Mm-hmm.
and separating people and trying to find some identifier that makes you good and them bad. And that's really what all
And
it
it was
boils down
probably a
to.
slippery slope. These girls start getting attention because they're having fits and then they're just accusing everyone. And it's just like, it's a slippery slope and everyone just gets, it's mass hysteria. It like starts small and it just
Yep.
grows. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so in the 20th century, artists and scientists have been fascinated by the Salem witch trials. Arthur Miller wrote the play The Crucible in 1953, which is great. I do recommend reading it. And many retellings of the Salem witch trials heavily focus on Tituba. So a lot in the narrative, she's described as like Black, but she was actually like an indigenous person. And a lot of the storytelling also turns her into like the sole reason any of this happened. Like they're pretending like she's the one who could like actually perform witchcraft and like she was just like cursing this whole like town. And a lot of people say it was like all her fault. But if you've been listening to this podcast, I think you can agree that is not true. That she was a pawn in these people's
Mm-hmm.
games.
Yeah.
And it's just like so disrespectful for her memory of like how scapegoated she was, and they can't even get like her ethnicity right when they're like retelling stories of her. Like they're making her like a different person.
Yeah, and like they're blaming everything on her when she was also a victim in all of this, who was someone who had no power in her community,
Yeah.
but they act like she's the sole reason for this.
In August 1992, to mark the 300th anniversary of the trials, Elie Wiesel dedicated the witch Trials Museum in Salem. Also in Salem, the Peabody Essex Museum houses the original court documents and the town's most visited attraction, the Salem Witch Museum. So we do know a lot of these hangings happened at Gallows Hill, but they didn't really know like the exact location. And in 1921, local historian Sidney Purley believed he'd found the exact spots of the executions near the base of the hill on Proctor's Ledge. So his conclusion led the city of Salem to purchase the land in 1936, calling it, quote, Witch Memorial Land. However, there was like no memorial here. Like they just kind of bought the land but didn't put anything to market. So in 2016, scientists did confirm that Proctor's Ledge was the execution site. So they went ahead and like investigated it and they're like, this is the correct spot. And a simple memorial was erected on July 19th, 2017, which was the 325th anniversary of the hanging of Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Wilds. So it's like a semicircular wall with stones engraved like with the name of the victims. I know a lot of us also have the image of the Salem witch trials of like women burning at the stake, women being thrown into lakes to see if they can float. That didn't happen in Salem, basically. It wasn't like that traditional witch hunt we imagine. So there were a lot of people accused, but they were hung, like they weren't burned, which I think is a misconception like a lot of us have,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of probably did happen in England a lot of these like weird stuff. But as far as like Salem goes, like that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So, this is the story of the executions of Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., Martha Carrier, John Proctor, John Willard, Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Mary Parker, Alice Parker, Ann Putiator, Wilma Red, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell, and Giles Corey. And the people who died in jail or from illness, like from jail, Anne Foster, Sarah Osborne, and Lydia Dustin. And as we said, over 200 people accused whose reputations were probably ruined.
And like just such a weird like cultural phenomenon that this happened, you know? And I mean, again, like we said, this has happened in many other ways to other groups of people at other points in history, but just such a wild, like, just from like some random girls having these fits that could have been caused from something else, could have literally just been made up, no idea. And then now all of a sudden, all of these people are just murdered and so many more accused or run out of town or whatever.
Yeah,
And
so many people escaped, so
wow.
many people ran, so many people were left in jail for a long time because they could not pay jail fees.
Mm-hmm.
People who lost their husbands, wives, mothers,
Yeah.
fathers, daughters, sons, family members, friends, like the effect this has on this community. Salem was not that big, and this is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people that,
Yeah.
you know, it's just madness.
Yeah, if you guys have been to Salem, if you've been to the museum, definitely let us know. I would love to visit one day.
I want to go really badly.
Yeah, I think that would be super interesting and would love to see more about it, you know, in person. And I'm sure that I would hope the museum is like respectfully done and has, you know, a lot of good information. I can imagine that it does. And
Yeah, I just saw someone who went there, and there's like a lot of places you can go. Like you can actually go to Rebecca Nurse's house, and
oh,
they have a
wow.
lot of stuff like from the 1600s in there, and like Proctor's Ledge, you know, different like places, and they have like
Mm-hmm.
a place where you can see where the meeting hall was,
Mm-hmm.
and like stuff like that, where you know it's very historical and stuff.
Well, we will have to
But
add
yeah.
that to our Caffeinated Crimes world tour that we're going to go on. And
Yes. A live show in Salem? Would anyone even come?
yeah,
Probably not.
you know what? We'll be there. That's okay. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is it has been a while since we recorded, and in that time, one of my longest friends got married, and
Mm-hmm.
she's officially a wife. And it was a great weekend, and it was a great day. And we tried just really hard to make it the perfect day for her, and it was just so fun. And it was really a great day. Hurricane Ian was trying to press in, but it was fine. Like it held off rain, and honestly started raining during the ceremony, and it was honestly just kind of magical. Like me
Yeah.
and Ashton were like, it just felt like, because it was like in like around all these trees, and it just kind of felt right. I don't know. And then
Hmm.
there was like a pavilion covering the rest, and
Yeah.
Lord have mercy, was that the best food I've ever had at a wedding? Those
Oh.
people were
Oh,
that mac
do
and
tell.
cheese.
Mm.
It was like herb chicken. I don't know what was on it. I know
Mm.
rosemary because I saw the little rosemary pieces, but it
Hmm.
was so good and so tender. And then there was mac and cheese that was great. The Caesar salad was really good, and probably the best cornbread I've ever had. It was very good.
That sounds
That catering
delicious.
company, she said it was like a catering company of like people who worked in like hospitality, like restaurants and
Hmm.
hotels and stuff, and they all got laid
Hmm.
off during COVID, and so they
Oh,
formed a
wow.
catering business together. But
That is so cool. I love
but
it.
it was awesome, and she's my longtime friend, our OG listener, our Patreon,
Hmm.
Katie. Congrats on such a beautiful day. It was great, and I'm so excited I got to be a part of it.
Yes,
But
congratulations, Katie.
Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is that this past weekend I got to see my family, which also includes Courtney, of course, because she is my family now. But
I've weaseled my way in. I'm like, you
exactly,
guys are
she's
gonna
like,
hang out with me whether you like me or not.
Courtney's like, I
I'm
am
your
a part of
niece
this
now.
family.
I'm your cousin. It's me.
Here I am. Yes, so we went down to Treasure Island, Florida with my aunt and my cousin to spread my uncle's ashes. So it was a very bittersweet. It was an absolutely gorgeous day, just like perfect weather. So it
Not
was
a
very
cloud in
nice.
the sky.
Yeah, literally. Like Courtney was like sitting there and then she's like looking and she's like literally not a single cloud in the
Like,
sky.
because we
Like,
were just looking ahead, and I was like, not a cloud in the sky. And then I
yeah,
looked all around, and I was like, I literally cannot find a single
literally.
one.
Yeah. So yeah, so it was really nice. It was too short of a trip, like always, but it was a very quick little weekend. But it was nice to be able to be there with my family for that and to get to see everybody. And we still had a good time, even though we were there for, you know, a not so happy reason. But
Mm-hmm.
it was bittersweet and it was a nice, goodbye too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you can tell us all about your experience in Salem, Massachusetts. Tell us about all your pets named Salem. I don't
Tell
know,
us
all the
what you're
things.
being for Halloween.
Yes,
We
yes.
reveal
Happy
our
Halloween.
Happy Halloween, and we
Yes.
reveal what we're being for Halloween in our Patreon episode.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to plug it twice, but I'm plugging it twice because
Do it.
we need more Patreons. No one's joined in a while. Y'all are dropping like flies, and we're poor.
Come on back, guys.
Am
Come
I
on back.
desperate?
Oh,
A little bit.
sorry, I just whacked the shit out of my microphone. But we also in the Patreon episode that comes out this week. Next
Thursday,
week,
two
this
days from
week.
now.
Yes. Yes. So the Patreon episode that comes out this week is also Halloween themed about how to make sure you're not buying a haunted house. So if you want to
Mm-hmm.
learn some of those details, again, you can head on over to patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, where you can see this video version of this episode. You can see me getting my cat out of a suitcase in the background. You can see our virtual Halloween themed backgrounds that we have going on. We have all of our bonus episodes. We have our Discord. We have Hangouts. We have something else that was in my ad-free episodes. If you guys don't want to
Mm-hmm.
hear the ads in the episode, they are all ad-free over on patreon.com for as little as patreon.com/caffeinated crimes for as little as $3 a month. So definitely check that out. We are also on Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod. We are on Facebook at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast. We are on Twitter at Caff Crimes Pod. That's CAFF Crimes Pod. You can email us at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and as always, please, please, please leave us a happy review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. I don't know if you saw, we just got another 5-star review from someone. I don't know
Oh,
who it is. So thank
oh,
you,
that's
friend, whoever
exciting.
you are.
Yes.
So please just leave us good reviews. It helps us get noticed. Tell your friends about us, like share it. You can be like me and in the middle of your Brazilian wax, tell your waxer that you have a podcast.
We've all been there,
plug
right?
it, plug it any way you can. But in the meantime, go have a spooky cup of coffee.
And don't commit any crimes or accuse anyone of being witches.
Yeah, trick or treat.